sont là? Oui, ils sont là. Qui viennent?
Hello everyone, and thank you all for being here with us tonight, in the room and online. The whole HEC Débats team is glad to welcome you tonight to our second HEC Talks with our prestigious guest, Matthieu Ricard. Thank you also to HEC for making this incredible event possible. Whether you're here in the room or online, you will have the opportunity to ask your questions to the guests at the end of the conference, so we will take some time to try and answer most of them. Feel free to send us our questions to the chat online, and we'll also give out mics in the room later on. Matthieu Ricard, it is a true and sincere honor to have you here in HEC tonight, to have the chance to discuss and exchange with you on important humanitarian topics that concern all of us as students, future leaders, and citizens. But before we jump into the core of the conference, I'd like to take a moment and try to say a few words on some of your many achievements so far. Many of you here might know our guest as a Buddhist monk. You have indeed acted as the French interpreter for the 14th Dalai Lama since 1989. You have also proven some great talent in photography, and we all have the chance to admire your work tonight here in this room. You're also a best-selling author of many books on meditation, Buddhism, altruism, the most recent one being Carnet d'un moine errant, in which you talk about your life and your 50-year-long spiritual journey in the Himalayas. Because you, Matthieu Ricard, you had the gut to choose your own path that was far from what was expected from you at only age 21. And I think as students, we can all agree that this is not easy and that we should try to get some inspiration from this. Indeed, you began your life working on a Ph.D. degree on molecular genetics under a Medicine Nobel Prize laureate. But then everything changed when at age 21, you met your spiritual master and decided to give it all up to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life in India with only a couple thousand of euros in your pocket. After almost 50 years living in the Himalayas, you have been called the happiest man on earth, which is quite a title. Since then, you have dedicated your life to improve those of all beings, human beings, first of all, especially through your humanitarian foundation you created in 2000, Karuna-Shechen, which provides healthcare, education, social services for the underserved people of India, Nepal, and Tibet. But you're also a great defender of those who cannot speak. You invented the concept of zoocide to point out the reality of mass animal consumption. So, Matthieu Ricard, you're a great inspiration for me here. And I hope we all get a small piece of your wisdom at the end of this conference, and I'm convinced that we all learn a bit more about ourselves, about others, and about our common future. I will now leave the floor to you, Matthieu Ricard. Thank you again, truly, for being here, and to the audience, have a good conference.
So it's a great joy and honor for me to be there with you, and especially it's a very inspiring to be talking to the younger generation, because obviously the future is in your hand. I heard many times the Dalai Lama say to young people, now it's your problem. But somehow we created a certain number of problems, and often by not being aware of what we were doing in terms of the consequences for future generations. You know, 10,000 years ago, there were 5 million people on Earth, roughly. So whatever they could do, and they used to have things that they could just throw with their hands. So even though as soon as humans came somewhere, they got very quickly rid of all the huge species, but still the damage was easily repaired by the Earth's resilience. Now, after the climate became pretty stable until recently, what you call the Holocene, it allowed people to start agriculture, raise cattle, accumulate wealth. So there was hierarchy came, started to have wars and conflict, because when people have more than others, they try to get it. And the population increased vastly because of this period of exceptionally stable climate. So now we reach 7 billion people. And our power has been multiplied millionfold with fossil fuel, electricity, atomic energy, and so forth. But the care for humankind, the care for 8 million other species who are our co-citizens in this world, and the care for future generation didn't follow the vast increase of power over our surroundings. So in a way, that power is now such that in the 1950s, what is called the Great Acceleration, everything, all the deforestation, use of fossil fuel, number of cars, and so forth, and as growing exponentially. That's called the anthropocene, the age where the human activities become the main factor that shapes the future generation. So obviously, this is a new factor. And nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, I'm going to devastate the planet. As a friend of mine, a scientist of the environment, says, if the CO2 was pink and the sky was getting pinker every day, we might be worried a little bit. In addition to that, evolution equipped us to react to immediate dangers emotionally. If I say HEC campus is getting in fire, or if a rhinoceros is coming in the room full speed, we all get up and run. If I tell you it's going to take fire in 30 years, you say, well, we will see. So that makes it difficult for us to be truly motivated for something that's going to happen later. But you are going to be the generation, I'm 75, so when in 2050, it's going to be 50 degrees Celsius, probably, in the east of France. It might be 105. I don't think I'll reach there. I hope, why not? But it's going to be pretty challenging. Now there's 0.5% of migrants in Europe, all over Europe. If there's, as Nicholas Stern's report pointed out, when there will be 250 million climate refugees, the picture will be different. So humanity will survive. We are not yet doomed to disappear as a species. I don't think there will be a huge collapse, but there will be certainly immense suffering. Conflict, famine. Already in Madagascar, there's been no rain for 4 years. So inevitably, you know, as a very loved French figure, Abbé Pierre, who was a very charismatic, said, you can't stop people who are starving from moving to places where they might survive. So we have a challenge, and how we can face that. You know, what are the concepts, the vision that give us hope that we can build better? I think we all agree, except a few psychopaths, that we want to work together for a better world. There's no question about that. Nobody is here just to create suffering voluntarily on the long term. So we wish that for ourselves, we wish that for our children and grandchildren, we wish that for the sake of everything that is living on Earth. But we are somehow feel disoriented by the speed of the change, and somehow the difficulty for leaders to take decisions, because it's always decisions that might be not so popular. At the same time, if you see the very drastic measures that were taken last year in all over the world, and sort of the willingness to the population to follow it, you might think that, if half of that determination could be put at the sake of preventing climate disaster, at least we will get somewhere. So, you are studying economics and you are going to shape the future. So let's see what kind of concept could be helpful. First of all, some of the founders of modern economics, like Francis Edgeworth and Pareto, they said, literally, there's no place for altruism in economic systems. That's a pretty tough start. The idea of maximization of personal preference and immediate personal interest. So, the Homo economicus. So maybe we should move to the Homo altericus, who really care for the fate of others and in the long term. So, and also economy is supposed to be based on the voice of reason. That's right, supposed to be. Even though all neuroscientists know that when you take, every risk in investment, your brain is completely under the power of the emotional areas of the brain. You are absolutely not rational. But anyway, let's suppose it's the voice of reason. But there are two things that the voice of reason can never address, because it's not made for that. It cannot deal with poverty in the midst of plenty. No, you have no interest, reason, if you follow just reason to maximize your interest, to pay more somebody who is doing T-shirts in Bangladesh for a very low price that you sell here. No reason. There's another thing that voice of reason alone cannot deal with. It is the question of the common good, the atmosphere, the quality of the air, of the water, of the forest, the quality, also things like democracy and science, which are, you can be a free rider, benefit from it, while doing nothing for it. So the voice of reason that maximizes your own interest doesn't tell you anything about taking care of common goods. So that's very two important subjects for dealing with a better future. So that's why we need to step out of that very narrow paradigm and go to the voice of care. Because even economists would say compassion and altruism has no place in the economic system, who today can say, I don't care? I don't care about future generation, I don't care about the environment, I don't care about biodiversity. I think that kind of discourse would not work. Now let's see what sort of concept could, and also we are in a situation where we can see this rampant sort of disharmony in this system of poverty, extreme poverty in the midst of plenty. When you see that during the last year of the pandemic, the richest got far more richer, especially a very few, 1% owns as much, twice as much as 50% of the poorest nation, of the poorest population in the world. That's the Oxfam statistic. There's plenty of those as a very... And there's only 0.3% of the GDP that is spent in the world to remedy to extreme poverty. I mean, this seems to be ridiculous. And when you see the way the system works, I mean, frankly speaking, just me take a small example without any personal sort of agenda or grudge or animosity. But it is an incredibly good idea to think of starting something like Amazon. It's a great idea. And if it's well done, well, possibly taking better care of those who work in those storehouses and everything, it is a great idea. But, we have a tendency to see numbers are quite abstract. So 120 billion, the fortune of Jeff Bezos, is just a B compared to an M for million. But if you think of it, if you unpack that, it's $120,000 million. What can you do for yourself that you cannot do with a few $1 billion? Nothing. But what could you do for others? So a system that is probably not voluntarily, but somehow de facto twisted so that this kind of things happen is almost indecent if you think that 10% of the world earns $1.8 per day, and in France alone there is 10 million people or 9 million people under the poverty line. So how can we address that? To be decent, I mean, at least a minimum of being compassionate and kind to just honor our common humanity. So we need a concept that allows to take care of the 3 times scale. The short term could be a mother in Africa whose just main goal is to feed her children for the next few days, or someone who looks at just immediate returns at the end of the month balance sheet. They have a different types of concern than those who see 10 years, 20 years, a generation, a lifetime, where basically we need to flourish in life. I mean, our natural aspiration to have a good life has to be fulfilled. So otherwise, a nation that is the most powerful and the richest, and if everyone is miserable, what's the point? What's the point? And then this is new challenge that came out because of this extraordinary power that we have now since the industrial era, scientific development, technological development, is we are shaping the shape of future generation. So selfishness is not going to be that concept. Now, my favorite Marxist is Groucho Marx. He said, "Why should I care for future generation? What did they do for me?" Well, Groucho Marx is my favorite comics, but unfortunately, I heard someone, I can say the name after all, I'm 75, I'm not going to be brought to trial. Stephen Forbes, an American billionaire, I heard him on Fox News and I wrote down exactly what he said. He was told about the rise of the ocean level in 100 years and the danger for humanity and for everything. He says, I find absurd to change my behavior now for something that happened in 100 years. So either this guy has no children or he doesn't care for them, basically. So this is not a viable solution. So selfishness will not be the concept that allows us to sit around one table and build together a better world. There's one single concept, and I tried really to look all over the place among scientists, psychologists, economists, without really planning to do so, because I was living quietly in the Himalayas for many years, but suddenly I was exposed back to the modern world. I've done a book called The Monk and the Philosopher. That was a big success, and all these things sort of rolling over. I was taken in a maelstrom and ended up 10 times at World Economic Forum, at the UN, all kinds of things that you will never think you'll find a Buddhist monk there. But there I was, clowning around. So if we want to find a real concept, it is really the consideration for others. And there's no other pragmatic concept. It's not an utopian, a naive idea. In France, we say bisounours, this kind of sweet guy that have nice ideas, but totally unpractical. It is a truly pragmatic concept. If you have more consideration for others, you will work for social justice. You will work for that mother in Africa that cannot feed her kids. So you will remedy to poverty in the midst of plenty. You will make sure that economy is at the service of society and not just the opposite. And by the way, I heard recently a survey saying that 75% of yourself, the young people, want to find a job and a work in their life that is in harmony with their value. The same number, 75, are ready to work for something that is a little bit less income, provided there is a sense of social and environmental responsibility. So that's very encouraging. A friend of mine who teaches Harvard Business School said a good 40% of them want to work in the humanitarian sector, in the environment sector. So that's very new. 20 years ago, they all want to go to Wall Street. So that's a good thing. So now, on the short term, this consideration for others will bring more social justice and not these incredible inequalities that have continued to grow and exacerbated last year and is still growing for the last 30 years in all the OECD countries. If you have more consideration for others, you will make policies, the social workers, the government, the economists, the financial, everyone will be geared so that we can bring something that brings satisfaction in people's life. It's not that the government has to tell you, you must be altruistic, or this is how to become happy. They have to provide the condition for people who want to cooperate and not be hijacked by the free rider. The economist from Zurich, Ernst Fehr, has made a lot of models, and he showed in economic games, which I cannot detail now, but you can look at his work, that 3/4 of people are ready to cooperate just based on trust, a priori. They are ready to invest something, and if everyone trusts each other, it works, and they end up getting much more. But what happens is free riders sit there, and they don't play the game, and they get a little bit of the reward, and then cooperation goes down to 0%, because free rider rules the place, and nobody wants to cooperate. Now, Ernst Fehr said if you introduce what he called altruistic punishment, it's just basically controlling those free riders with a minimum of regulation. Then they see their interest in cooperating as well, and then cooperation works, and it goes back now to almost 100%. So basically, we should provide, the governments, the economic systems, to provide an environment that most people who want to cooperate and to play the game can do it safely. We can also bet on the banality of goodness. That means most of the time, most of 7 billion human beings behave decently with each other. That's why we are so shocked when there are massacres, extreme poverty, barbarian acts, because this is not the sort of natural state. This is not the baseline. This is just, those are deviations. So it is possible. And if we have more consideration for others, then we will do something that we care for future generations. Many of the environment scientists, they completely agree that, in fact, the question of environment is a question of altruism versus selfishness. Because if I don't care about future generations, no problem. You can cut the forest and devastate everything. If you don't care at all, no problem. But they will say, you knew, and yet you did nothing. And so, as Greta Thunberg said, it's no more the time for just blah, blah, blah. So I think this is something that's very powerful. And it's very inspiring, because it's not just about a catastrophe and Armageddon. It's just working together. And Martin Luther King said, we came in different ships, and now we're all in the same boat. The world is interdependent. Climate is interdependent. Global health is interdependent. We have our common humanity, so we should stress our common humanity at time of uncertainties. And this is why we should dare to bet on altruism and consideration for others. It's not some naive ideas. We should teach it. We should bring it in the common life. We should bring it in the workplace. And just to end on a survey done by the OCDE, where there were people who were asked in many different countries. I think they had a sample of 30,000 people, showing 15 different factors that contribute to well-being. Income was about number 6. Number 1, quality of human relationship. And what is quality about human relationship about? It's about sort of behaving nicely with each other. Otherwise, what are you talking about, quality of human relationship? So anyway, once I was asked to speak on altruism in Australia, and they said, you have 6 hours. And I didn't exhaust the subject. So I was told to speak 10 minutes. I already taken a little more. So now I'm just listening to your questions.
Thank you so much, Matthieu, for this fascinating introduction to the subject. I'd like to begin by asking you to paint us maybe a more detailed picture of what an altruistic society would look like and how this vision was shaped by your background and upbringing, and maybe especially your time as a student, since you're addressing a room full of students today.
Well, physically, altruism is an attitude. And by the way, some people say, well, reason is more important. But I remember since Robert Frank of Cornell University said that, altruistic people are no less or no more reasonable than selfish people. They just have different goals. And these goals is the common good. And also, the idea that it's a sort of a sacrifice. Some of you might have heard of, fortunately, she's not very well known in the West, but maybe you know a little bit. I mean, in Europe. But it's one of the persons that's very, very influential, especially in very conservative sectors of American society. It's Ayn Rand. And she says, if you are altruistic, you become a sacrificial beast. You become the sacrifice to others. And she says it's so stupid. She says, in my mind, altruism is immoral. It's very tough to hear that. But I think she didn't get the point. Altruism is not a sacrifice. It's also the best way to have the twofold accomplishment of others' good and your own. Because you see, selfishness doesn't work for two reasons. First, if you think me, me, me all day long, it's pretty miserable, I promise. First, you feel miserable because everyone becomes either an instrument of your interest or a threat to your interest. So the whole world is polarized in that way. And if you think me, me, me all day long, probably people will not appreciate you that much. So it's a lose-lose situation. On top of that, it's dysfunctional because it's supposed that we are this one single little entity, and you might think, okay, I'm not against others' happiness, but it's not my business. I'm taking care of my happiness. That will work fine if we were this very separate entity, but we are so intertwined. We are so interdependent, interrelated. My happiness, my suffering are so closely linked with the suffering and happiness of others. So we are in the same boat. So it's bound to dysfunction because it's at odds with reality. While consideration for others, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of scientific research on those subjects. It is known to be, for yourself, the most satisfying state of mind. When you are generous, compassionate, kind with others, that's the moment you feel happy within yourself. And also, obviously, other people will appreciate if you are kind and generous and altruistic. So, those who are opposed to altruism say, ha, I see you coming. This is the warm glow. You don't do that because you really care about it, because you just feel good about it. Well, it's not true, because if you just heard that and you are damn selfish and you see someone, a beggar, you say, okay, I'm quite depressed. I heard that if I give something, I will feel good. So I give something, I look, and I don't feel good. Why? Because the feel-good idea, or the warm glow, is just a natural consequences of being altruistic. It's simply that it's a bonus. The real importance is to be genuinely concerned by the fate of others, by alleviating their suffering. And on top of that, as a secondary effect, it turns out it's also the best way to flourish in life. So you get two for the price of one. It's a win-win situation.
Thank you for this response. During your very rich introduction, you've told us that, as some economists say, and most people deem it, our capitalistic economic model is not compatible with altruism. Yet, it seems to be one of your key motors. So, is it realistic to fundamentally redefine the way our societies are organized?
Now, what I mentioned is some of the founders of modern economics said that. But there are many other voices, like this idea of the voice of care. For instance, Denis Snower, who is a leading economist, he founded the Global Economic Symposium. He was the head of the Kiel Institute for Economics. He's one of the advisors of the G20. He's a well-known and modern economist, always invited to Davos and so forth. He very strongly advocates about the voice of care. He says the only way, together with the voice of reason, to deal with the main burning issue of modern times. So he doesn't say that we should disregard reason, of course, but without the voice of care, it's just going to be somehow dysfunctional for those two major factors, which is poverty in the midst of plenty. And inequalities is definitely one of the biggest challenges of our world. Even in places like the World Economic Forum, I mean, when I was going there, at least two consecutive years, the civil society meetings that happens there said that inequality is the main priority as a challenge to remedy. So it is, look at Joseph Stiglitz's writings on it. So this is not, economics, after all, affects everyone's life, and it should be at the service of society, not just like this idea of running down the well to the people. It just doesn't work. It doesn't happen. Everyone knows now. So what's the deal? If it works, that would be great, but it doesn't. So we have to find a system that somehow has more sense of justice and takes care of the poverty of those who are so much in need. I mean, just give you some few numbers. Like average US citizen emits 200 times more CO2 than a Zambian. A Qatari, 1,000 times more CO2 than an Afghan. So the idea is not to deprive those who are in need in countries which are developing from most basic need of energy, that so their kids doesn't have to study with a burning sort of lamp that harm their eyes, that provide them with renewable access to energy, but to stop the wild overconsumption at the top. We know that 7% of humanity contributes to 50% of climate change, of CO2 emission, while 50% of the poorest section of humanity only contribute to 7% of CO2 emission. So there's a fundamental climate injustice as well, just as with the COVID pandemics. Again, those who suffer most was the poorest country, who don't get vaccines, who don't get proper health care. So inequality basically is bad for everybody. It's bad for longevity, it's bad for the level of education, it's bad for the average quality of the health system in a country. It's just detrimental to a good life.
So how can that sort of international altruism or interstate cooperation to solve these crises, like the climate crisis, be achieved? Because, as you say, with the COVID-19 crisis, for example, we observed very nationalistic behaviors from most of the developed states.
So again, I think the idea of the voice of care makes very much sense. And people say, the idea of a completely deregulated economy, that's, let's say, I'm not an economist, but in the conversation I had when I was writing this book on altruism, clearly the extreme side, the Chicago school, is no regulation at all. That's what they're trying to implement in the US. And that gives rise to the reign of the free riders, because they actually this minority, which are reckless free riders, basically hijack the system because the cooperators don't feel safe to cooperate. So what those economists who say that we should provide ways or sort of for those who are the majority of people who are willing to trust and willing to cooperate, is not to impose regulation that stiffen creativity, that stiffen enterprise with heavy regulations and the burden of charges and taxes and all that it becomes impossible to survive even you are willing to work. It's simply sort of safeguards to control the extreme free riders who basically rule the game when it's absolutely zero regulation. That's what we are seeing with those vast discrepancies of wealth that makes no sense. And instead of remedying to social needs, you start making, space tourism and all that, and which is just indecent when there are people who can't feed their kids in Madagascar.
Thank you, Matthieu. Now to focus more on the core theme of the conference, and meaning the necessity for the youth to be altruist. what role do you conceive for the youth in this altruistic movement? Is the necessity to be altruistic a responsibility or even a burden that lies disproportionately with the youth?
Sorry?
Is the necessity to be altruistic a responsibility or even a burden on the youth?
No, it's not a burden. Because if it was a burden, if it was a sacrifice, I mean, it's a win-win situation. What kind of burden is that? Frankly speaking. I mean, do you think it works with this extreme sort of
no, but
we're doing in terms of environment? I mean, you will be the one who will be 50 degrees in summer in the Vosges in France or somewhere else. And you know, it's already 49 in Rajasthan in India or Punjab in Pakistan. So now it's going to be 55. You can't get out. I promise you, I've been in 49. You just can't do anything. You just try to survive and breathe. And you measure your breath. You know, you breathe by necessity, not by pleasure. So that's what is going to happen. So basically, it's more cooperation. You know, thinking a little bit of long term, getting a better world together. And what's wrong with the, you know, mutually working for a happier world? I mean, that's a sacrifice. I'm totally in favor of that kind of sacrifice.
Yeah, definitely. So am I.
And also it's the kind of lifestyle also. There's too much of, you know, the marketing in 1930s was sort of conceived in the US. I forgot the name of the guy who really thought about the idea of marketing. And basically, I mean, literally, and I heard a Nobel Prize of Economy, I forgot his name, Hamroff or someone, anyway, who said basically what the marketing was about, and it's not me who invented that, is to make people want and buy what they don't need. We should put advertisement in the subway, don't buy what you don't need. Spend time with your kids and things like that. If I need something, definitely I'm going to look for the best and I'm going to get it. Why should I buy what I don't need? That's crazy, but that's how somehow it works. So, just me give you one anecdote. When I was in New York, and I saw at 9 in the morning a huge line around 2 blocks. I was near Penn Station about to take a train. People waiting patiently there, and there was mixed from all over, you know, ethnical and all that. So I just got curious. I said, what are you waiting for? Oh, they say in 2 hours, this big place is going to open, and they are going to give a very high, I mean, famous label silk scarf from $700 down to $200. So they are all waiting for 2-3 hours. You know, it was at least half a kilometer line waiting for that. And suddenly in my mind surged the image, I was just coming from Nepal, of a kilometer-long line at 7 in the morning of mothers with a little can of, to get kerosene for the day to cook for their family. And I thought, this is something wrong. When the crisis of the superfluous and when the crisis of need. So to balance that, it's not a sacrifice. It's just like, it's a better world. And we do that. And it's in your hands. I'm going back to the forest or the mountains. I'll probably survive a few years, and I'm fine with not much, so no problem for me. Your problem.
You mentioned during your introduction that the youth today increasingly thinks about sustainability and purpose and impact when making career choices. And I was wondering what advice you would have for young people in the room who are thinking about those questions of purpose.
The sound is bon. Si tu peux le dire en français.
Oui, je disais que vous disiez que les jeunes de nos jours, ils
parle sans micro.
réfléchissent de plus en plus à ce qu'ils veulent faire de leur vie et ils prennent en compte les questions d'environnement,
oui, bien sûr, bien sûr.
De créer un impact.
Sure. Et alors?
Et donc, quels conseils vous pouvez donner aux jeunes
Yes.
qui essayent de chercher ce sens à leur vie?
Sure. Yes, I think I said it not here, but in the room before, so I'm not repeating myself. You know, all brains, nothing left in the right side and nothing right in the left side. That's how all brains are. once I was in Canada with young people like you, and they said, you know, probably a bit younger, they just came out of college and they're about to start university and so forth. And they said, you know, we filled up a lot of questionnaires about orientation. We saw some psychologists, some advisors, and we tried a few jobs because we had a 6 month between something, interlude. We travel a little bit, but we really don't know what we want to do in life. I mean, I was asking myself the same question when I was 18. I knew what I didn't want my life to be, without meaning, you know, boring, sort of not falling into meaninglessness and depression, but I didn't know what I really, really wanted it to be. I could not find a real role model. You know, I had met with my father many philosophers. My mother is an artist, so I met great painters. I have an uncle who was an explorer, so I met great people. I had lunch with Igor Stravinsky when I was 16, almost by accident, because a friend of mine was a journalist who interviewed him, and I was myself music. So then scientists at the Pasteur Institute. So I met all these great luminaries, but you know, there was the same distribution among 100 gardeners, 100 philosophers, 100 mathematicians of very good people and very hard to be people, you know, difficult and not nice, and happy people, unhappy people, selfish people, altruistic people. So it's, why? How can they be? Where shall we look for a role model? You know, I used to play chess. Bobby Fischer is a fantastic genius, but total schizophrenic guy. I don't want to be like him. So then I found it when I went to the Himalaya, some men and women of wisdom and compassion that give me, okay, if I could become a little bit like that, it would be great. So I think what we really need is to bring the best of ourselves at the surface, to say we need to grow those human values. So when I met those young people, I said, look, stop computing that in your mind. No, you're in Canada, I was there, so there's beautiful places. Go to a forest, go nearby a lake, alone or with good friends. Sit there, don't think too much, and see what comes at the surface, what you really, really want to do. And after that, even it looks utopian, at least, you know, when there's a will, there is a way, as we say. So I'm sure when you have passion for something, then you can do it. You know, I think it's Aristophanes that says education is not about filling up a vase, it's about lighting a flame. So that's what we need, passion. And then be careful where you put your passion. If the passion is to become the richest, the most powerful, the most famous, the most beautiful, or ever young, it's like betting on winning the lottery. Maybe be careful not to look for happiness in the wrong place. And so we should avoid being addicted to the cause of frustration. So all this is something we should think about, our real value, what matters in life. And by the way, both contemplative science, 2,500 years of, you know, thinking about the way the mind works, as well as last 30 years of research in neuroscience, in which I participated a lot as a guinea pig. I think I spent 120 hours in fMRI machines, has shown clearly through neuroplasticity that those components of genuine happiness, which is altruism, which is resilience, which is inner freedom, inner joy, are skills, and that we can cultivate with training. Like we learn to play the piano, we learn to play tennis, we can cultivate. I mean, we know we need to learn how to read and write. Nobody's against that, having an education and a professional training as you do. By which mystery, those basic human qualities would be at the top, at their optimal state, without doing anything. That will be an exception to the rule. So they can be trained, and they are very fundamental. I mean, if you play the piano, it's great. If you don't, it's not a huge drama. But if you don't, you know, let those human qualities flourish, then it's a drama for your own life and for those with whom you live.
From what I understand, altruism can be reached through individual introspection and spirituality. Should it and could it be institutionalized in order for it to become universal in our society?
I just went to a shop where they sort of fine-tune my hearing aids. I'm not sure they did a good job. So, without the mic, because the mic bounced, and je peux dire en français vite fait. No, it's not about French and English, it's about it's megou, like when he speaks on the mic.
Est-ce que l'altruisme qui est plutôt par une introspection...
C'est le plus fort quand même.
Okay. L'altruisme qui vient plutôt d'une introspection individuelle ou de la spiritualité, comment est-ce qu'il peut être universalisé?
Okay. Good question. So, compassion, altruism, benevolence, consideration of others has nothing to do with religion. It can be enhanced with religion. It's probably the most common factor of all religion. We said, the golden rule. Who is against the golden rule? Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. If that rule will be applied, the world will be a much better place right now. As the Dalai Lama often says, religion or spirituality is a choice that we can make or not make when we have the intellectual capacity and enough knowledge and wisdom and discernment to do it, and it's completely up to everyone. And by the way, about half of humanity is not living day to day according to, even though they traditionally belong to a religion, but not basing their life upon that. But compassion, altruism, is needed from the moment we are born till the last breath we breathe out. A newborn will not survive without the care, the love, the tenderness of parents who take care. Elderly people will not survive very long also without care. And throughout our life, without the care, the cooperation, also we're very unlikely to have a happy life and to survive. So this is even more fundamental than religion, even though religion and spiritual tradition like Buddhism or philosophy can of course enhance that, can give the tool to bring them from a dormant state to their optimal state, like any skill. So they provide a toolbox for that. And I think there's a friend of mine, Jean-Tim, said there's a course at HEC about the toolbox for finding a more balanced and happy life. So yes, it is possible. It has to be cultivated. The Greek word ascesis, people think asceticism is like, you don't eat anything, no more ice creams and all that. It just means exercise, practice. And you practice, you study, you practice if you do a sport, you practice if you play music. So kindness has to be practiced. I mean, Aristotle said virtue comes by practicing virtue, not just by thinking about it.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we have plenty more questions, but we'd like to let the audience, both here and online, ask a few as well. So if anyone in the audience has a question, please put your hand up and we'll take some from the live stream as well.
Pardon? Ça va, merci.
Thank you for the talk. You mentioned how today more people...
Yes.
Today more people want to do work that aligns with their values. But my question is about values. So I think we learn them as kids. So for example, if my parents taught me not to lie, not to cheat or steal, then these become what I value. But what if, as a child, I was taught the opposite, to be selfish, or values that we don't consider to be good? Then the work I would do would align with those values, and I would get my satisfaction from stealing or cheating or...
Okay. So sorry. This it's not anyone's fault, but the sound system is not happy with my hearing.
She is saying...
En français. Sans le micro.
Nous, on a été éduqués à valoriser les des valeurs bonnes, entre guillemets,
Oui.
comme s'occuper des autres, etc. Mais il y a des enfants qui sont éduqués à prendre plaisir ou obtenir de la satisfaction en faisant du mal. Et
Oui.
vous répondez quoi à ça?
Well, of course, education is the key of everything. And that's why, you know, in the past, usually supposed to be moral education was provided by religion when they were not telling people to be fanatics and so forth, and traditional education. And now it's very hard to have a value-based education, although it's coming back. In England, for instance, there's a quite strong movement called value-based education, purely secular. People have a tendency to resent that. They think, you know, it will be biased, it will be influenced by some cultural or religious preference. I saw a survey conducted with 30,000 people from 15 to 25 years old. And the question was, do you think there are universal values? And sadly and surprisingly, 60% said no. So, you know, I discussed with the people who did the survey, and it seems that, you know, people in China or in India, they were thinking if we say yes, that means basically, since those surveys come from the West, that means they will impose their value to us. So if you just had that question globally, say, no, there are no universal value, the traditional value in India, traditional value in Africa, traditional value in China or something. No. If you're asking the question, is generosity a universal value? Is kindness a universal value? Is friendship is a universal value? Is honesty a universal value? Who can say no? No. Cheating is very good, no problem. Well, no, it's difficult, isn't it, to reply that. So I think we should agree that, again, as I said, education is not just filling a vase, but lighting a flame. Martin Seligman did a study on positive education. Now, he asked many parents, now, what do you want education to provide to your kids? And they say, well, we want them to succeed in life, but also succeed in life means to be happy themselves, and also, why not, to be a good person in society. Very few said, I want my son or my daughter to be so successful that everyone else is suffering around. Basically, they said they want to be a good person that thrives in life, that finds his or her own way in life, and that hopefully can also be in harmony with society, and all kinds of similar values. And then they say, okay, what the education is teaching to children? Discipline, which is good, problem solving, which is good, and success, which is good. But that's not what the parents were hoping as a priority for their children. In the 1930s in the United States, there was a quite strong movement that started from Massachusetts about cooperative learning instead of competitive learning. That model was really interesting and good. There were books written about it. People came from all over the States to study how do you do competitive education. For instance, if you put 5 students together, one which is a little bit, more a good student and with less good student, and they sort of prepare the lesson together, so those who are a little more advanced help the others, no more competition and the sense of bonding and so forth. So this system works very well, not only for the quality of emotional balance, relation with the teacher, and even academic results. It has been tried in Australia on a few 100,000 people from some school. It was successful. So why it doesn't pick up, I don't know. But there are many ways that we could, for instance, it has also been shown that companies or enterprises where it feels good working are more successful. Many studies have shown that. Now, what does it mean, a place where it feels good to work? It's not just salary. Again, it's the quality of human relationship. What makes people nuts in a company? Oh, this boss is impossible to deal with. My colleagues are so terrible. They don't cooperate. And they get burnout. There's the burnout of the employees because they seem to be stuck in between those above and those below, with very little margin for creativity, so they sort of spin, unable to express this, and they think it's their fault, and they end up burning out. This is not the same as burnout from empathic distress, like you find in the medical world or social workers who deal with homeless. Then there's the burnout of the boss, of the heads which is mostly that they are so much their responsibility and they're not able to translate that into prosperity, and they burn out. So this burnout is very frequent, and it's a cause of complaint. And it turns out that the quality of human relationship, which is based itself on cooperation, on putting common skills together, on even there's someone who is a simple worker who finds an ingenious way of doing something that is listened to, once I was asked, again, sorry to bring back the subject of Davos, but it's also about some kind of trauma to Buddhist monk to go there. So one evening, they had invited Christine Lagarde to speak on leadership, one of those meetings. And she could not come, so someone thought, they asked me if I would come. I said, they're going to be pretty surprised to see me turning instead of Christine Lagarde. So then I was with a lady who was head of New York Times, and they said, what makes a good leader? So I thought, basically, it means someone who is good at service. What does that mean? Service, he must be serving well the company. I mean, the company works well. Then he must be serving well those who work in the company, so that they don't burn out and they feel happy to work as a team. And then, ideally, serving society, not doing things that harm others. Just to give an example, 6 million people die every year of tobacco. Of course, they are free to smoke or not smoke, but you think that if you provide what kills 6 million people, you have to think twice about thinking it's ethical. I don't know. I think not, but up to you. Anyway, so this idea, and also I read another survey about what makes a good leader. Leaders were very admired throughout the world. Leaders, I mean, in companies and things. There are two things came out. One is vision. Someone was a vision. And one who is humble. What does that mean? Not someone who is going, just next to the walls, trying not to be seen, but someone who is not just puffed up with the, sort of exploding narcissism. So something like that. So I think there's many lessons to be taken to make a workplace a more human place, and that's economy is not exception to that. I mean, I heard Muhammad Yunus saying that if the profit is the only goal, then it's really a caricature of human beings. We have many more things that are important. And humanity is not reduced to just making profit and succeeding in this and that. We are human beings. We need to thrive. And prosperity is one part of it, but there's so many more things. Intrinsic value, friendship, how you feel. Last year, during the beginning of the confinement, I was in Nepal in the mountains, and some journalists managed to get hold of me on my little cell phone with a very small signal. Of course, because they were talking to me, they say one of the aspects is that many people, besides those who suffer terribly of depression, poverty and sickness, or having lost a dear one, but there was also one problem, one issue that they were mentioning to me, is that people were very hard to find themselves alone with themselves. I thought, it's quite amazing. Such an advanced civilization or culture that do not have the tool to just be happy sitting there, with themselves. Basically, I mean forever, 20 years sitting with yourself, maybe, I don't know. But at least not feeling comfortable by being with themselves. While contemplative tradition, this is what the idea of cultivating the tools to deal with ups and downs of life, whatever circumstances, and to be perfectly well if nothing happens special. So I think those things work together. Even whatever walks of life or job you do, to be a basic human being is so important. I remember Jody Williams, when she was negotiating the anti-landmine treaty that got the Nobel Prize. She said that they were all arguing about commas and fragination about the treaty. So what she did is she lined up outside the big meeting, it was in Oslo, people on wheelchair who had lost legs to landmines. And then outside, every, I think, 30 seconds, she made a big firecracker, a big fake explosion. That was the frequency that someone in the world just blown up by anti-landmine personnel. And then one time she had time to speak, she said, look, all of you who are deciding on this treaty, when you go home, you are a human being with your children, with your family. Here you're just as arguing about commas and words. Just pass that treaty once for all. So, she appealed to the humanity of people, and that's what we should do and not forget that.
Thank you, Matthieu, for this response. We're going to take another question if the audience, please.
Sorry,
if someone
too long
wants.
answer, so then not many questions.
Good evening, sir. Assume I'm a young person going out of HEC and my first workplace isn't altruistic at all. What is my first step there? What do I do?
Oh, yes, I got it, I think. What is the first step to become altruistic when you are not, right?
When you're what?
When you are not altruistic, that's what you said? Is it right?
Sorry, when your workplace isn't altruistic.
How?
Huh? Oh, I see. Well, that's the problem. That's what I say. Places where it feels good to work are also those who prosper better. So in a way, if a place is not altruistic or at least cooperative and provide good quality of human relationship, which by the way is mostly synonymous with lacking altruism, because quality of human relationship means you are kind to or altruistic or have consideration or care for each other, right? Those places don't thrive as well. So it simply seems to be common sense, and also it seems to be fulfilling the natural aspiration to people that they spend most of their life at the workplace. So it's better to have a place where you're happy to be, and that depends on the degree of cooperation. So that need to be assisted. The person needs to have understanding. It could be based on looking at those studies. It could be based on thinking. It could be based on trying. But there have to be a will, of course. And there has to be somewhere, at those in charge, the kind of willingness to do something about that and to understand that this is a good direction to take. Well, when that's not the case, people get quite stubborn in sticking to this, reckless competition, and it certainly poisons the situation. But of course, it's not an easy answer to give right now. But at the same time, we have to think to establish a way of working, a way of being together that allows that kind of good atmosphere and that we can flourish at the workplace.
I have a question here from someone online who's asking about the practical applications of altruism, and he or she is asking how can one inculcate altruism in one's individual life, and whether it's related to minimalism.
To?
Minimalism.
Huh?
Minimalism.
Oh, I see. Well, first of all, to make altruism sort of flourish in one's mind, it really matters how much altruism is present in your mind. That's the idea of mind training. Sometimes people call it meditation. But meditation, sometimes people think it's just sitting with closed eye with 2 incense sticks and a mango tree and don't think. That's not going to work. So meditation is basically mind training. So it's exposing your mind again and again to benevolence, to kindness. That's how it works. I mean, that's why you learn everything else. So how you do? Well, you have to start with something easy. You think of someone very, very dear. It could be a child, could be a friend, a companion, could be an animal. Someone you feel just, you only want that person to be happy. May that person be fully happy. Just your mental landscape is filled with benevolence. But usually we think like that for 10, 15 seconds, then something else happens. Imagine that you would do that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe 4 times a week. Well, that's how things slowly change. You start something, gain momentum. And neuroscientists will tell you if you do something 10 minutes or 20 minutes, 5 days a week for a month or 2, you already see change in your brain. So that's how you train. Now, what was the question actually?
Yeah, you've answered it. And do you think minimalism is necessary in one's life to be altruistic?
How to bring it in one's life, yes. No?
Est-ce qu'il faut être minimaliste?
Oh, minimalist, yes. Well, I don't know what minimalist means, but I mean, if it means happy simplicity, in a way, yes. It must mean, again, this idea of marketing, not wanting badly what you don't need, because that's no end. When you get 1, you want 2, 2, you get 4, and then, never ends. I remember Dalai Lama seeing somebody who came to see him. He had 5 rings. He said, "Oh, you have 10 fingers. You could put 5 more, but then stop." Likewise, probably if he owns the whole world, it's still not enough. Something like that. So if you don't have contentment, you never have enough. And we say, there's a Tibetan saying that one who knows to be content is like holding a treasure in the palm of his or her hand. So contentment doesn't mean, that you are kind of, mediocre. It just means that you don't thirst for what is not needed. And you can know how to be satisfied so that we can do better with less, in a way. And you go on to the quality of life. I'll just give you a very quick hint about a study that was done over 30 years by, Tim Kasser, and I forgot the first name, but it's Ryan something. They studied for 30 years thousands of people on their sort of tendency to consumerism and materialistic-based value, extrinsic value. That means status, whether your latest model of the car, your dress, your social sort of environment, and all basically your image and so forth. So they took the 25% most eager to consumerism, materialism, and then they took the 25% people who are less interested in those, more interested in intrinsic value. Again, friendship, living a harmonious life, being in nature, and so forth. And then they measure other factors that goes together with that. And there's a book that's a mainstream book that summarizes that, called The High Price of Materialism. What they found is quite interesting. People who are the most highest in consumerism and materialistic extrinsic values, they look for hedonic happiness. That means based on endless succession of pleasurable experience, which is more like a recipe for exhaustion than happiness. Then they have a lot of social connection, but less true friends. Their health is usually less good because their tendency to all kinds of excess, like drinking, partying, and all that. They are less sort of interested, concerned by holistic values, like environment or social justice. They are more obsessed with debt, curiously. And then the opposite for those who are less consumerism. They like a demonic happiness. That means this well-being as a way of being, not as just pleasant sensation. They have true friends. They are concerned with holistic sort of purpose. they tend to have a more healthier way of life. So Tim Castor says, well, I'm not a moralist, but if you want to be truly flourishing, if you want to have real good friends, if you want to have your place in the world and a sense of responsibility, you should know that at least intrinsic value are really important, and they should not, be neglected for the cost of extrinsic value. So there's something to be thought, to be think about. This is just a good survey. It corresponds to our personal experience. When we are satisfied and content, that's it. If we constantly thirst for something, we say in Buddhism, it's like drinking salted water. More you drink, more you thirst. Or you say it's like scratching when it's itching. The more you scratch, you feel more to scratch until it bleeds. So it is relief when you scratch, but it's even better if you don't itch, isn't it? So I remember David Henry Thoreau, the novelist, and he was a man of nature. He says, simplify, simplify, simplify. So simplify our thinking, not always ruminating, projecting all kinds of thoughts, hopes and fears, like and dislike, like crazy, the blah blah of the neurons. Simplify your speech, less blah blah blah. I mean, I should speak for myself. There's the blah blah car in France, I'm the blah blah moine, blah blah monk. And simplify your action by not doing things which is just like basically vain, but try to act in a meaningful way. So it's not just like a moralistic stand, it's just a more harmonious life.
If you still can, we are going to take another question in the public. So
you mean the last one?
Maybe the last one. It depends of what you want.
9:30, yes. It's time for monks to go to bed. One more, okay.
Thank you.
Hello, sir. As you're a wise man, I was wondering that maybe you would know where we could find the meaning we want to give to our future paths. I explain myself. We all know that we want to be happy in the future, but where can we find the meaning we want to give to our future life?
Where to find what? Meaning, where to find meaning?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I mean, it's a bit, it's basically what I try to share.
I think you answered that question already, actually, earlier. I think you answered that question, actually, earlier.
But I mean, I tried to say something more, obviously, because if
I mean, there are other questions.
No, if you didn't answer, there's something still missing. So let me just think for 1 second. I think, we can find out by ourselves. I mean, what really is meaningful in terms of getting something that, if you look back 20 years later, you will say, that was 20 years well spent in my life. So it's not going to be just endless search for wealth or power or rank or success or something, because there's always a sense of something missing in that. So it's really to be a good person, whichever activity one might do, to remain a good person. If we face adversity, if we face people who maybe not behave so nicely, to deal with them with being firm, but without any animosity. Hatred is one of the most destructive way for your own happiness. Nobody else can be full of hatred and happy at the same time. So at least to preserve this sense of inner balance, sort of dignity, of being aligned with your value, and also, most people will then probably relate nicely with you because they will appreciate that, especially over the long term. And even they don't, even somehow you find sort of hard nuts to crack. Psychopaths, it's very difficult to change, but at least you will retain your own inner balance. You would not have lost that by playing the game of those who do the, harming and taking revenge, resentment. If you have resentment for a long time, you are building a wall around your heart. So, trying to be a good person, and that's somehow the best way to find meaning in one's life. So, the Dalai Lama often says, it's not about what is the meaning of life, but how I can give proper meaning to my own life. And usually, it goes through benevolence. That's what I'm truly convinced. There's no such thing as a good life that is dominated by animosity and malevolence. It just doesn't work. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthieu, for your time this evening. Thank you to the team at HEC Talks and HEC Débats for making this conference possible. And thank you to all of you for being here, both in person and online. Any feedback or comments you have, we'd be delighted to hear them. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.